Okay, everyone, thanks a lot for joining so early morning in India. And I know it a little bit later when it's come to Asia Pacific and Australia. And it's a pleasure to be hosting this excellent event. And we had a pretty successful curtain raiser yesterday where we talked about various aspects about what this event will be all about. And today, it's time to say a very good morning and welcome to the new era of agriculture commodity trade. Welcome to day one, session one of Commodity Week World 2026, or as we lovingly call it, CWW 26. Today, we declared that the agriculture value chain has crossed a critical threshold. The reason we declared that is because what we are seeing around us. We are seeing challenges around climate. We are seeing challenges about global conflicts. We are seeing challenges in insurance, in logistic, in movement of commodities. So there are a lot of issues around the commodity trade. And I would say, while they were slowly building up, but this year, everything has come on the surface. The traditional playbooks, the one that relied on predictable crop cycles, stable freight corridors, reliable trade alliances, have officially gone. Now they are gone for a very simple reason is that it's not that the people didn't want to do trade in the old-fashioned way. They're very comfortable. You'll find that majority of large corporations, mid-sized traders, intermediaries, they're very comfortable with the way the things were. But the change is only constant. And that change we have seen triggered or catalyzed by geopolitics and climate. Now, we are no longer observing cyclical market corrections. We are operating within baseline of permanent structural volatility. Over the next 6 days, across 18 tactical sessions, we are bringing the global boardroom directly on your screens. CWW26, organized by HnyB, Know Your Commodity, is presented by AgriGuru Online. It is supported by Kripco Agri, Bajrang Group International, and Bingani Group. We are also having association who have partnered us for this initiative. OATA Myanmar, Ukraine Pulses and Soybean Association, GOPK Indonesia, and other institution partners include Solidaridad and World Cooperation Economic Forum. CWW 26 is moving entirely beyond the delayed data of historical balance sheets and heavily scripted corporate presentations. While we'll have some presentations for sure, but as I said, scripted corporate presentations. This is an unscripted, unfiltered war room. Why war room? Because we are seeing challenges and crises all around us. We are here to democratize high-stake market intelligence, mitigate the systematic risk of information asymmetry, and equip you with the foresight needed to defend your margins. Before I move further, I'll just do a small mic check. Neeraj, am I visible and audible?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Thank you. Sometimes it happens that actually in your own flow, you stop doing these checks and later on you come to know that you have to repeat everything. So thank you. Thank you, Neeraj. Neeraj is my colleague. He's a CEO of HnyB and strong force in pushing me to come out with the 6-day marathon global event. So now, as we know, it is absolutely fitting that we open this unprecedented global marathon with the most vital, dynamic, and heavily contested agriculture commodity on the planet. Welcome to Maize Complex. We have 3 curated sessions with experts today on this important commodity. 9 a.m., that just now we have started, India time for Asia and Pacific. 9 a.m. GMT for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And last of the day, 9 a.m. New York time for North and South America. So those who are enthusiasts, please join all the 3 sessions. Otherwise, all these sessions are available as in recorded form in LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter or X, Facebook, everywhere. So you'll automatically find it somewhere, don't worry. The sessions are beamed live, as I said, and also are recorded. So let's talk about a little bit of the macro view. While we know that wheat and rice are the foundation of human survival and oil seeds dictate the energy transition and pulses are important for our nutrition security, but maize is the undisputed roaring engine for global agriculture. One of the largest commodity, in fact, largest commodity being cultivated, produced, consumed. Why? For a very simple reason. It is on trijunction of food, feed, and fuel. It is backbone of animal protein supply. It is backbone of starch sector. It is backbone of domestic fuel mandates in form of ethanol, which we are seeing all across the world. The maize balance sheet globally is caught in fierce hemispheric battle. The latest institutional figures confirm the tightening grip on the market. The baseline number is roughly 1.3 billion tons for 2025-26. And we'll see that there would be at least 20 million metric ton dip in 2026 and 2027. Last year, we were overall surplus. This year, we will be deficit. This is also shown by various different organizations when we talk about on the demand side as well. The demand side, we are seeing increase this year as well. For simple reason is that more consumption in feed and fuel. The tightening stock of 2026-27 could be a game changer in maize industry. We are seeing roughly 20 to 24 million metric ton dip in our overall carry, which would be around 270 million metric tons to 275 million metric tons by end of 2026-27 marketing year. The market is actively pricing in extreme vulnerability of Brazil's safrinha crop, Hormuz conflict, as well as multi-year conflict going in Black Sea. And evaluating the impact of these tighter global carryover numbers will definitely have impact when it comes to even domestic pricing in some of the Asian economies. When you combine that with the choke point threatening internally as well in some of these countries, whether we talk about Brazil, which is one of the largest producer of maize, we are seeing that writing is on the wall. So it's just not about the bulk container not moving. It is also about within the hinterlands of Brazil, produce not reaching the port. Now we also see the feed versus fuel debate getting more intensified with many countries across the world because of high price of crude oil looking for enhanced energy mandates. They want more ethanol to be blended. We are back home. We are seeing that in India also that's happening. So however, to truly understand where the global maize market is heading for the remainder of 2026, you need to look not just at supply engines of the West, but also demand crucible of the East. And by East, this is where we talk about where we are sitting. So the theater is Asia Pacific. Demand squeeze and policy pivots are common here. In Asia Pacific region, the maize narrative is entirely driven by insatiable, rapidly evolving demand profile and complex domestic policy pivots. The region does not just consume commodity, it dictates the global trade flows. Let's break down APAC into China, India, and rest. So when we talk about China, China is evolving. They'll be producing more maize this year, close to 307 to 310 million metric tons than what they did last year. This also reduced their overall capacity to import. We'll be seeing a dip in import of close to 50%, reaching to something around 6 million metric ton this year. So China will be importing less for sure. Now, the overarching question for 2026 is that is possible consumption in China increase so that we might see some light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to import by China? Doesn't look that way because we are seeing that overall demand in China has plateaued. Coming to the second key player in this region, India. So India is at point of inflection for a very simple reason that we have seen a pivot when it comes to India's ethanol policy. A policy which was predominantly created with mindset that 50% to 60% of ethanol production will be coming from sugarcane-based feedstock. Now the pivoted to grain. Roughly 72% of ethanol production in India would be driven by grains. And in grain also, maize and rice. The maize share itself is more than 50%. So there is a huge diversion of maize in ethanol, which takes away from the feed industry and the starch industry, that maize. But at the same time, India has been lucky last year that we had a bumper crop. We were close to 43 million metric tons of production. We are seeing that we might not exceed that, while a lot of analysts have been talking about the production going further. But in our own wisdom, we think that actually because the farmer didn't get the right value for their produce, we might not see the further increase in production number of maize in India, at least for 26-27. Now the rest of the Southeast Asia. Now there is a battle between Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia. In fact, Vietnam and Indonesia, we have started seeing that the consumption patterns are improving. And there is a challenge because of the freight. As the maritime freights and the spread is skyrocketing, we are seeing that that could create one of the hurdle in increasing the overall demand of maize in these countries, these geographies. But still, the demand is pretty strong in these geographies. Going forward, if we see the settling of freight, insurance, as well as in case the overall cost of crude goes down, we might see the demand picking up in a faster and more robust manner going forward. So the day of relying on lagging monthly report to make multi-million dollar procurement decision are over. Navigating the extreme volatility requires elite ground level foresight. We are going to extract that foresight. We have assembled an elite strike force of maize experts. We have originators who manage cross-border physical flows. We have strategists who model the shifting domestic parities. And we have the corporates which are involved as leaders in trading of maize. We are going to dissect the Asian feed metrics, analyze the impact of grain-based ethanol mandates, and uncover the critical arbitrage opportunities hiding within the current supply chain disruption. To our live audience, please engage. Do share your questions, your views on comment boxes of your LinkedIn, X, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are seeing it. So with that, welcome to Commodity Week World 2026. Let's officially open the Maize Asia Pacific War Room. And with that, I would invite my first panelist, Aramal Jokshi. He is a chief trader staples at Reliance Consumer Products Limited. He is an expert procurement and trading executive, currently serving as chief trader for staples at Reliance Consumer Products Limited, as I said, with a deep specialization in grains and raw material sourcing, accumulated over a role as global leader with COFCO Rocket. He possesses a comprehensive command of regional trade corridors. His skill set focuses on navigating market volatility, optimizing large-scale agriculture supply chains, and establishing robust trading frameworks within the APAC region. So I would start with Anmol asking the very fundamental question: how do you see global and Indian demand supply for upcoming 2026 and 27 marketing season, Anmol? Over to you.
Hi, Deepak ji, good morning. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this CWW 2026. I remember participating in the same conference that a seminar that you did in January. It has been very insightful, and so it has always it is actually a pleasure to participate here. Coming to a question of how do we see the global supply demand? Deepak, did I get your question correct? Is it the global supply demand that you asked?
Yes, 100%. And if you can also touch base on India in your discussion, that would be great.
Right. Deepak, you summarized very well in the opening remark, a very good summary about the global S&D. I mean, I don't want to repeat that, but let me just talk to you. Let me just talk the highlights out of that. I mean, as you rightly said, the last year's crop is approximately 1,312 million metric ton, 1.3 billion metric ton, and this is expected to be 1,295 million metric ton in 26-27. That is like a change of 17 million metric ton downwards. Just to give you a perspective, when we go back to 22-23 types, I mean, this crop number was 1,165, which went up to 1,231 in 23-24 to an all-time high of 1,312 last year and 1,295 this year. So even though it is 17 million metric ton lower, I don't think the overall crop is drastically a problem because we have seen crops of the size of 1,232 and 1,231 just 2 to 3 years back. And coming to the demand side, we can see that the feed and residual demand is estimated to be about 830 million metric ton for 26-27 against 819 million metric ton for last year. That is like an increase of 10 million metric ton. And FSI demand is estimated to be 477 million for 26-27 compared to 473 million metric ton last year, which is like an increase of 3.6 million metric ton compared to last year. But again, the biggest thing that we should take away from the global S&D is how the ending stocks are going to be, which you also mentioned in your opening remark. The ending stock is going to be about 277 million metric ton against 296 million metric ton. That is like a decrease of closer to 20 million metric ton compared to what it was last year. Again, when we talk about the global S&D, we should also talk about the individual components. And United States basically contributes the biggest chunk of that. And what we estimate in US is a crop of 406 million metric ton compared to 432 million metric ton of last year. That is like a decrease of 26 million metric ton. And that is, I mean, especially seaboard gets influenced quite a bit by what happens in the US. And so this 26 million metric ton downside that we see in the US is something that we have to keep in mind. But on the demand side, we see a little bit of moderation in the US demand, where the feed and residual is estimated to be 155 million metric ton against 157 million metric ton. That is like a small change of 2.5 million tons. And the total consumption is estimated to be 331 million metric ton against 334, which is like a reduction of 2.5 million metric ton. But again, the ending stocks, 461 versus 472 is like a change of 11 million metric ton in US. And even though there is a decrease of 26 million metric ton in the crop, the ending stocks is down only by 11 million metric ton. That is because we had a good opening stocks. The opening stocks was 54 million metric ton versus 39 million metric ton, which was 15 million metric tons over and above last year. So some of this impact of the lower crop in the US is cancelled out by the higher opening stocks that we are carrying, and a slightly lower demand that we are seeing in the US. And net, this 26 million metric ton doesn't translate into a 26 million metric ton reduction in the carryout. It basically translates to only about 11 million metric tons reduction in the carryout in the United States. Coming to South America, the Brazilian crop is estimated to be approximately 139 million metric ton versus 135 million metric ton of last year. That is like an upside of 4 million metric ton. But as Deepakji, as you rightly pointed out, there is a lot of ifs and buts there. I mean, the weathers and all need to be closely watched. While in Argentina, we are seeing the crop at approximately 55 million metric ton downward from 59 million metric ton. That is like a downside of close to 5 million metric tons there. But again, something which is to be noted is an estimate, the export estimates of Argentina is expected to be about 38 million metric tons compared to 43 million metric ton, which is like 5 million metric ton lower than last year. So the export availability from South America, in spite of a better Brazilian crop, it is expected to be slightly lower compared to what it was last year. And on the Ukraine side, we're looking at a flattish type of crop, 30 types as per the USDA, and exports ranging between 22 to 23 million metric ton for the next year. And again, on the China side, as Deepakji has rightly pointed out, we are looking at a very good crop, 307 million metric ton compared to 301 million metric ton of last year. So that basically changes the import equation. And even in 25-26, we didn't see China importing that much. And even for the next year, the import estimate is only about 6 million metric ton, which used to be 23-24 million metric ton 4-5 years back. So that is like a big change in the Chinese S&D. But again, what we need to closely monitor is that the Chinese stocks carryouts are fast. They're drawing down on the stocks. But the stocks which used to be 200 million tons plus a couple of years ago, it is now at 166 million metric tons. So even compared to last year, 178 million metric ton carryout stock will be coming down to 166 million metric tons. So the China is drawing down on the stocks. So while it is not very important for this year, I mean, in the sense that it may not impact because of the better crop there, but going forward, China could come back into the market 2 to 3 years down the line. So again, just to summarize, I mean, I would say the global balance sheet is tighter. The US production is down 6% YOY. I mean, we have to keep a close watch on the weather risk. And but more than anything, I mean, more than S&D, what is driving the markets now is geopolitics. I mean, we haven't forgotten the Russia-Ukraine war and the bombings that keep continuing on the Black Sea ports. The Middle East is the new driver. I mean, that has definitely increased the freight rates, It has affected the availability of fertilizers and fuel costs. That is basically driving the markets. The tariffs. The Middle East has made us forgotten the tariffs. Just 3-4 months back, we were talking about how Trump is impacting the markets, but now the US-Iran war has taken over that. And last but not the least, we are now in an El Nino type of situation. That risk is looming over the global and Indian S&D. And again, before I conclude, coming to the Indian S&D, when we had this meeting in January, nobody wanted to touch corn. And even they were not takers of corn at 1,600, 1,700, 1,800 type of prices. And today, people, we are now again back to about 2000 levels, even in Bihar, even at the peak of the harvest. Export demand to Southeast Asia keep moving. And the tables have completely turned. And more than the S&D, at this point of time, IMD has come with this forecast of 90% of monsoon, and this kharif crop is very dependent on the monsoon factor. And we know that whenever there is El Nino, the Indian production is going to get impacted. So the tables are turning. We have to keep a very close watch. And probably from this so-called surplus, India is slowly moving probably to again another year of a deficit. From an exporter, we might get into being an importer again next year, or at least going to a very tight stock scenario. And the ethanol demand is continuing with approximately 12.8 to 13 million metric ton of corn getting diverted into ethanol. And we are again talking about E20 moving to E30 in the years ahead. So definitely, structurally, the Indian balance sheet, I think, is going to get very tight going forward. And this El Nino is going to accelerate that tightness this year itself. That is my call at this point of time.
Perfect. Very well summarized, Armol. In fact, you have taken care of out of 4, 2 of my question in one speech itself, and an excellent, your flow was so good and so contiguous. Actually, it was just pleasure hearing what you were saying. So now I'll come to the I would say elephant in the room. As a trader, how do you take care of such volatilities? You talked about El Nino, and we have to watch. You talked about geopolitics. We have to watch. You talked about suddenly from 1,600 odd people talking about 20 to say 2,000 per quintal, and still it looks only one direction as of now. I think majority of the commodities will only look at one direction in India because of IMD. In fact, IMD has put a cat among the pigeon by talking about 10% deficit. 10% deficit. Just remember actually when we saw it last. And the year we saw it, we know actually what happened. I don't want to put more panic by talking about it, but at the same time, as a trader, how do you take care of such volatility?
Excellent question, Deepak ji. I think the short answer is that there is no magic bullet, I think all the traders in India has gone through that roller coaster ride over the last 12 months or so, where more than S&D, a lot of other sentimental factors and the geopolitics and everything else used to drive the markets per se. But I would say at this point of time, knowing what we know, this 10% prediction from IMD. IMD doesn't normally see. What I feel is that IMD normally doesn't give bad news just like that. They are normally very conservative with weather predictions like this, because more than agriculture, it also have other policy implications, including it affects what the policy of RBI and all. So when they come up with a number of 10%, there is something seriously wrong, according to me. And so what I would think at this point of time is that, more than anything, whichever industry you are there at, especially in India, whether it is the poultry industry, whether it is the starch industry, or whether it is the ethanol industry, I think it has to be a year where we have to be focusing on being resilient, rather than trying to see whether trying to go for short-term or cost-cutting measures, or trying to think that these things will wish away. See, one thing is very clear, that the demand is structurally moving up, whether it is the poultry industry, whether it is the starch. Okay, starch. Okay, if the Indian economy doesn't do good, then there could be a question mark on the starch side. But on the ethanol side, on the poultry side, I think the import is moving up. So the demand factor will be moving up. The production definitely is going to be more. So I would say accept it at this point of time, and start making the strategies with understanding in the background that the crop this year is going to be lower, and demand is not going to go away. So use the harvest to the maximum. Try to build up inventory, especially if you are a poultry industry or a starch industry or ethanol industry. Build up stocks, because if we run out of stocks, unlike in the last El Nino year where Ukraine was a big savior, where they had an export surplus of close to 35 million tons type of level, and where India could easily import non-GMO corn. This time, Ukraine supply probably in the best case would be about 22, 23, 24 million metric ton, which is like 10 million metric ton, at least lower than what it used to be earlier. And this 22, 23 million metric ton has a structural demand from Europe. And the ability to Ukraine to come and save the Indian industry if there is a shortage this year is, I don't think it is there. I mean, that non-GMO corn is not there in the market. Probably a little bit can come from Myanmar. But if India becomes short, if India crop becomes a problem, if India gets short of corn, India cannot import enough corn from Ukraine, enough non-GMO corn from Ukraine. That is something that we have to keep in mind. So use the Kharif as an opportunity to build inventory to run the industry. That is my advice at this point of time. Definitely within India, we don't have a hedging mechanism. We don't have an exchange. And Indian corn cannot be hedged on the global exchanges. So all those things are not possible. So the best thing at this point of time is to own corn into the next harvest season. That is what I would say at this point of time.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Aramol, for such an excellent intervention and excellent advice. Only we have to be also careful about the fact that the government of India has a habit of putting stock limits, right? And that is also has to be one consideration we should keep in our mind. So definitely stock for your requirement. Don't stock for speculation. That would be my advice. Thanks a lot, Armol. It was a pleasure having you. And always, as usual, very insightful and very crisp. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepak. Bye.
Now we move on to our next speaker, and it is a privilege to have Mr. Ricky Thapar. He is Joint Secretary at Poultry Federation of India, and he's a highly respected industry advocate serving the industry in multiple capacities for a very long time. Being a Joint Secretary of the Poultry Federation of India, he have his own say in putting right perspective to the stakeholders on what Indian policy should be. His experience at the intersection of livestock production and commodity market makes him a central voice, aligning national trade policies with corporate interests. His expertise lies in feed grain microeconomics, regulatory affairs, stakeholder engagement, where he works to build sustainable growth and modernization models across India's rapidly growing poultry sector. We know poultry needs maize, and they need maize at the right price. Poultry is also facing challenges when it comes to protein. And that brings the intervention of Ricky very important. So, Mr. Ricky, with the rapid modernization of India's poultry sector, how do you foresee domestic feed grain demand evolving in direct competition with ethanol mandate? Also, we heard Armol talking about non-availability of non-GMO maize is a challenge if there is a deficit. Your views on these 2 points, sir?
Industry, which has seen 7 to 8% annual growth in the last decade, is valued at over $30 million US. The industry has transformed itself from following conventional farming practices to a modern commercial production system. However, the sustained supply of feed ingredients remains a key challenge. Poultry feed mostly consists of maize, that's a 60%, and soybean meal, that's 35%, and 5% is other feed additives and nutrients. Stating that there has been increasing diversion of maize towards industrial use and ethanol production, Confederation of Indian Industry in the vision document for poultry sector in 2047 had also stated the current growth level of maize and soybean production in the country will be insufficient to meet the demand of the poultry industry. The CII had urged the government to allow import of genetically modified maize and soybean because of unprecedented increase in feed prices. The demand-supply situation has entered a new phase, especially maize, a key feed ingredient, has become India's single largest feedstock for ethanol. With growing demand for maize following the government's future plans to expand ethanol blending program may result in lesser supplies of poultry, dairy and aqua feed. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent intervention. And I totally agree with you, that poultry sector has been a linchpin of, growth in India. And the farmer income there has been substantial and it has helped overall increasing as I said, that, income of Indian rural sector. Now, what regulatory alignments are most critical right now to ensure stable, cost-effective grain supply for growing livestock industry? We know that actually the government is not very keen to go with the GMO part of it, but at least processed GMO products is a possibility, whether we talk about processed DDGS or something of that sort. Even when we talk about soya, processed soya meal, that could be a possibility. Do you think that actually, the time has come that we see to it very closely?
Yeah, to meet the growing needs of the livestock sector feed, the government needs to have an open import policy for sourcing maize and soybean meal from the various countries, irrespective of whether the crop are GM variant or not. With the competing demand from ethanol, starch and other sector, feed ingredients import should be open without any restrictions according to us. In August 2021, the government had relaxed import rules to allow the first shipment of 1.2 million ton of genetically modified soybean meal to support the domestic poultry industry after a record spike of feed prices. Poultry industry has urged the government repeatedly to allow both import and cultivation of GM maize and soybean to fulfill the requirement of these two major feed ingredients in the coming years. The sustainable supply of feed in coming year would be crucial for the growth of the poultry industry. Currently, animal feed production is estimated close to 56 million metric tons, which includes dairy feed, 16.5 million tons, aqua feed, 2.5 million tons, and poultry feed, 37 million tons. The feed ingredients are mostly maize and soybean meal. About 60 to 65% of the output of maize is used as poultry and livestock feed, while the rest is used for industrial use. In the 2025-26 crop year, July to June, the Agriculture Ministry has estimated maize production at 52 million metric ton, while output estimate by trade is around 48 million metric ton. As per industry estimate, poultry industry used around 26 million metric ton of maize in feed, while 5.5 million metric ton was used for dairy feed and around 6 million ton was used by starch industry and only 1.5 million ton used for human consumption. 1 million ton in alcohol and about 1 million ton in seed and wastage. Balance 8 to 10 million metric ton of maize was diverted to for ethanol production. Thanks.
Excellent intervention, sir. I totally agree with you. But I will take even the industry numbers which you talked about, 48 million metric tons with a pinch of salt. We are talking about 10% increase in maize production from the last year. I don't see that happening. For one reason is that actually, farmer doesn't see what is the price today. He see what price he got last year when he harvested, and he has not got. I would say, especially when we talk about in April, May, and even for the Rabi crop, he has not got good amount of money. Secondly, also there is before the El Nino story, there was challenge when we talked about the maize ethanol industry, talking about we cannot pay because we are having overcapacity and we are in losses. So I think farmer is confused, and he might look for soybean and maybe pulses more than the maize going forward for sowing in this season. So coming to you with for the last question, in current scenario, right? What are the sustainable growth models that are proving successful in insulating Indian poultry industry sector from global supply chain shocks? Would it be simply price rise? Because that can also lead to a little bit more pressure on the government, because genuinely your demands are right. If your input costs are high, the egg would be costlier, and even the chicken tikka, which I love eating, would also be costlier. So do you think that that could be the way forward?
The poultry sector is a vital sector for the livestock industry, which provides employment to over 6 million people. While industry is witnessing a steady pace, sustainable feed supplies at reasonable price would be crucial for the growth of the sector, as feed price constitutes over 65 to 70% of the cost of production. Any increase in feed prices hit the margins of poultry farmers. The government has been focusing on growth of agriculture and allied industry sector. There are several industries which require maize as their key raw material, so the government should focus on. The current growth level of maize production in the country will be insufficient to meet the demand of poultry industry in the coming years. Another major challenging area is the dried distillery grains which soluble from maize. DDGs, a key byproduct of ethanol production, are not of desired quality for feed and the toxin levels are high. The challenge is that this toxin level affected DDGs when used in feed will set into the food chain. Thus, allowing liberalized import of DDGs could be also meet the rising feed demand of the poultry industry. Regarding sustainable growth model, as you discussed, the poultry industry, like other agriculture sector, is subject to supply and demand scenario, market structures, government policies. An open import policy on animal feed ingredient would go a long way meeting the demand of livestock and poultry feed. As the demand and supply feed gap between consumption and production of feed grows, liberalization import of soybean meal, maize and DDGs would mitigate the problem and keep the prices under check. While the competing sector demanding maize supplies, liberalizing policy on import is paramount importance for sustainable growth of the poultry sector, which is growing at a steady pace of rising demand for protein-enriched food. As I discussed earlier, the poultry industry is growing 7 to 8% minimum per annum, but our agriculture growth is only 1 to 2%. So in the coming year, there will be a mismatch of supply of feed ingredient. So poultry industry is worried about that, and government of India has to look for that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir, for your intervention. It was always a pleasure to listen to you, Ricky. Your expertise, your understanding of the sector is second to none. And keep raising our flag across the globe. I see you all across the world talking about Indian poultry industry, right? All the way from Brazil to US to Asia Pacific, right? I used to say that actually, though I have reduced my own travel, but I used to believe that actually I speak at conferences a lot and engage and interact a lot. But you have been a true champion, and I think someone I look at with your energy, and maybe if we are able to even do 10 to 15% of what you are doing, we will serve the industry well. Thanks a lot, Ricky, for your
Thank you,
intervention.
sir. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So now we go to our next speaker, Shweta Saini. She is a distinguished agriculture economist and founder and CEO of Arcus Policy Research, known for her data-driven insight into trade and food security. Previously a senior fellow at ICRIER, she brings over 15 years of rigorous academic and practical experience investigating global grain markets, price volatility, and agriculture welfare system. Her work frequently shapes national legislation and international dialogue by translating complex economic data into highly strategic, actionable policy recommendation. So thanks a lot, Shweta-ji, joining us, and it's a pleasure to have you.
It's always a pleasure to interact with you. Thank you, Deepak ji, and heartiest congratulations on this initiative. It's heartwarming to hear everybody possible on the topic to be at your platform. So thank you.
My pleasure. So, ma'am, I think you wanted to have a presentation. Would you like to just...
I've been told it's just 15 minutes. If you have time, I can show some data. Otherwise, I'm good to discuss.
Perfect. So let's then discuss. So first question, it's very important because you have been seeing it the maize industry from different lens, and you're neither a trader, you are neither a processor, you are neither a user, and you are neither a government. So that gives you a vantage point. So how does the current data suggest the feed, food, and fuel trilemma will ultimately impact the domestic inflation and agriculture welfare system in India, in particular, and South Asia in general? And we have heard, Ricky, we have heard, Amol, we're talking about there would be tightness in availability domestically as well as globally. Going forward, do you think like there could be inflationary pressures because of this? And how do you see India's ethanol policy?
I mean, too many questions packed together. Let me start first by saying, see, you're absolutely correct. We are neither of those, and therefore the vantage point is that we'll just look at the numbers as pure research, and we look at a macro picture as much as we look at a micro picture of maize. Now, I have a few things that I will put forth in the beginning that we've been writing constantly about a trade-off between food, feed, and fuel. And the premise is now more visible as we progress, and we've been talking about it. Since 2021, we see that about 2 million hectares of land has gotten added under maize. In the same period, about 1 million hectares of pulses land has actually gone off. We are not saying it's a one-on-one mapping, but then we are actually witnessing where larger acreages are shifting to maize. And therefore, the whole debate of, yes, there is a trade-off where land is being used towards crops for fuel is evident and vivid. Our own calculation says approximately 7 to 8 million hectares of land will be required to produce these energy crops for E20. Having said this, I think the government has been visionary just because we had thought of E20 or higher ethanol blending rates before, that we are in a situation where we're not saying completely substituted, but the global volatility transferring into India is little tapered because we have some sort of cadence coming from the ethanol blending from within the country. We see that much grains will be driving the ethanol production within the country. And going forward, we have every capability to supply even to the extent of E22. But then the food, feed, and fuel debate continues to stay center stage, as Ricky Thaparji also said it just a while back. But apart from that, I will add two more things. One, last year, our own estimates are that we needed about 13 million tons of maize for ethanol. We expect that to go up a little further because of some more contracts likely to come in the coming time. And so we anticipate that at least 13 to 15 million metric tons of maize will get into ethanol first. Second, we see a lot of price spikes in soybean meal, because of which we anticipate that the DDGS, which is a byproduct of the distillation process, will become more lucrative and making the distillation process more financially viable for the producers. And third thing, and this is where I would bring in a little different perspective as your first speaker, Mr. Joshi. He basically said that there is an El Nino, and then the last El Nino, when that happened and the country went for a toss. I will just like to bring forth a few facts here, which of course I'm not negating what he said, but these are just the facts to bring in a complete picture. You know, back 2014 and 2015 were two consecutive drought years. Drought by IMDs declared when 10% of rainfall deficit happens in the country, and that is exactly what IMD said. So technically, we could be in the drought zone, technically by definition. But having said this, 2014, 2015 were drought years where 14 and 15% LPA deviation happened. And so was about 2018. But you know, in all of these years, agriculture GDP did not fall as much. It did not grow as much, but it did not fall also. The growth rate was smaller. Having said this, things change. Country is investing largely into creating irrigation capacity, unlike 5 to 10 years back when only 45 to 46% of our gross cropped area was under short irrigation. Today it is 54%. A lot of investment is happening into micro irrigation, drought resilient seeds. So we see a lot of resilience already developing. Having said this, maize would require 3 irrigation. So it will be a tactical decision. I was looking at the acreage numbers from the summer crops just from last week, and we see that despite the prices being below MSP, the acreage under maize summer crop is higher by 2 lakh hectares compared to last year. We're not surprised. There is a structural, robust demand for ethanol coming from ENA, coming from feed distillation, even from food, which is also growing earlier, which was growing at less than 1%, is growing at 1.5%. There is a structural demand, but there is a resilience in the system. Yes, the balance sheet is likely to play well, but we do not see much alarms, at least from a researcher perspective. Deepak ji?
Okay, excellent intervention. So no, I saw you talked about some very important data points, specifically like, what got into my attention is that farmers have still increased the acreage even with the low cost. Now we see that another challenge coming in. Maize is a fertilizer heavy crop, right? At the same time, it is also need right moisture at the right time. And both the factors might be not very, I would say, pro farmers when in case they are going for maize. Now, these are some of the point, like, people like us, just like, are not economists and gifted like you, right? To keep on getting into these data points and make our own assumption. According to you, like, what are the key data points which an economist looks at to get early warning, whether it is about a choke in the supply or where the demand exceeding and eventually leading to the price points? What are those data points somebody should be looking at?
See, clearly, we look at domestic and global prices and past prices. So let me list out. It's a crop balance sheet that even you as a trader would be tracking, and we as a researcher track, but we look at a macro picture too. So if we were to look at what variables to track, I will be looking at how much of the area under which state is under assured irrigation, what duration of the crop is being sown in case of maize. If it is 3 irrigation that a maize crop will require, I will have to see the spatial spread of rainfalls rather than the rainfall intensity itself. Yes, fertilizer would be required, but so it is required even for rice. So, it is a relative requirement. Wherever the price or the economic benefit of the farmer lies, the farmer will be sowing it. The proof of the pudding is we track acreage areas, and the acreages are suggesting that the acreage under, even though it's marginally up, but then the acreage being up despite prices being low and the expectation of rainfalls and the fertilizer crisis being existent, we anticipate that much of, and the farmers are tracking the same. Of course, they look at past prices, but if that was the only indicator, they won't have sown. So they look at the entire ecosystem. They anticipate a strong demand for maize to stay. So even though the price did not happen the last year, as Mr. Joshi was also saying, just in the last few weeks, the prices have spiked, and we anticipate that even though the current crop is coming into the market, still the prices stay high. So I think the farmer is catching the nerve of the situation, where they know structurally the demand is strong. And that is exactly what we track too. Deepak ji, we did a study of 20 years where we tracked 17 key agricultural commodities of Indian agriculture, which covered about 70% of India's agriculture. And maize was one of them. And we had found historically with a 20-year analysis that India is usually in a non-tradable zone in maize. So we sometimes export, we sometimes import, otherwise it's a non-tradable zone. Recently, we've had episodes of imports, but largely our production is going up. We are showing reasonable resilience. Again, the key is not just area, it is also yield. So, the yields are rising overall because Rabi acreages are coming up, summer acreages are coming up, Kharif yields are tapering off. Much of the gains in maize is coming from area. And that is what we track, area and yields together. Which season are they cropping it? And therefore, overall, we develop a picture that farmer also anticipates that even though the prices last year were low, costs of production are relatively lower, and therefore they must be making reasonable returns to ensure sowing it again. Otherwise, the farmers are swift in shifting crops. We know nationally at least 10% of the acreages move across crops when the prices fall. So that cyclicality stays. But in maize, we see that it is reasonably downward sticky. So, so we anticipate that much of acreages would come about. So at least in our own assessment, currently, we see the balance sheet and we track the numbers. And the balance sheet may not be as tight. The opening stock, if it is 2, we anticipate the closing stock to be between 3 and 5. But of course, you all are trader tracking the commodities in a much agile manner. Ours is more a macro analysis, but happy to get your views.
No, I totally agree. Like, there are multiple perspectives, and this is where I think one of the challenge has been like, the low productivity of India, right? So, and end of the day, when you are 1/3, 1/4 of the global productivity benchmarks, definitely we are non-GMO, so we'll have low productivity. A lot of people say that it doesn't matter, but I strongly believe it does matter. Now, based on that, what happens is that actually, like, after a certain stage, right, you are having a lid on where you can go. For example, we see that in MSP also, the government did just like, 15, 10 rupees increase in MSP because they knew that actually there is no possibility of taking it any further. Otherwise, it will bring down all the other industry which are dependent on maize. And at the same time, in case this year, we have to give MSP to the farmer, the trade or the industry or the processors, they won't be viable at all. Your ethanol would be as costly as your petrol, so then doesn't make sense for OMCs. So that will lead to demand destruction eventually. So I think we have got ourselves in a position where actually, like, we know what could be the possible downside, but upside becomes a challenge. Now that brings me to the last question for you. Like, how do you see, like, long-term story of maize in India? Do you think, like, we have entered where, as you rightly mentioned, that, like, it is not traded much, but at the same time, our parities are not there for export. And at the same time, we are seeing a lot of challenges because high crude means lower use of petrol as well. So the demand of ethanol is also going to taper down. And at the same time, the feed industry is actually, like, is not adopting DDGS in the way that we would like them to. With that, where do you see a challenge or risk going forward in the maize ecosystem?
So, Deepak ji, we have been projecting demands for different biofuels. We've been studying biofuel industry very closely for the last 3 years. Apart from ethanol that we've been studying for about 10 years now, what we say is that the energy demand is not going down, the growth rate is. So you may be growing earlier, energy demand or petrol demand as per PPAC would be growing at say 7 to 8% earlier, is now still growing, but growing at a less than 4 to 5%. So, so the idea is that the energy demand won't taper, and therefore, even to maintain E20, you will require greater quantities every year. So it's not as if E20 maintained this year and you require a 13 billion liters and that stays. It increases even if it is E20 to be maintained going forward. So clearly, we anticipate that E20 is likely to go up to E22. Much of government policies are likely to support it. We see a lot of biofuel traction coming up, and the government will likely impetus it up, but crops for fuel should be discouraged, has to be tapered off in the longer run, or maybe the growth rate, the aggressive growth rate at which we are growing may have to be contained in some years, because we anticipate that at least about 11 million hectares of our gross cropped area, which is also tapering, So our all agricultural land available for undertaking cultivation is has a cap. So it was earlier at 200 million hectares. Now it is reached about to 10 to 20 million hectares because of increasing cropping intensity. But that too has a cap. That has a cap because there is urbanization, there is climate change. So, you do not have unlimited land. So the government is rightly thinking about other residue and waste-based biofuels, which is the right strategy. And again, the government has to undertake a land use planning, because unleashed land, irrigated land and fertile land going to crops may actually play out on its other vision of oilseed missions, other pulses missions, and therefore they will have to strategically look at a land use planning. So unlimited land under maize is completely visible for the next 5 years. But what's going to happen in 10 years? We see that the government will likely look at other biofuels also. So clearly maize is likely to stay. Maize is not going anywhere. There is an ENA demand. There is a feed demand. So maize is likely to stay robust, and E20 is likely to stay. How much it grows over time, we'll just have to wait and see. But land use planning is something that we've been recommending to government for a long time, and that needs a deeper dive. Deepak ji.
So now last question to you. Sorry, actually, I'm exceeding the question to you because of what you're saying is very interesting. Do you see India going China away? From 30 million metric tons, we going to 110, 120. China is already at 300, but I'm saying based on our size and type of demand you're talking about, is in next 5 to 6 or 7 years, 100 million metric ton of maize is a possibility? Do we see that?
So, there is a high-yielding variety maize available. The acreages under that are not rising as fast as we'd like it to be. So we've created prediction scenarios till 2030 and 2035, and we anticipate not less than 70 to 75 million metric tons becoming a likelihood, largely coming from acreages and marginally coming from yield. But in case there is a yield augmenting seed that comes in. So our assumptions assume that from current 60 to 65% area under high yielding variety, that acreage is likely to go up by 90-95 soon. So in that scenario, we anticipate that maize production, nowhere it's going. I mean, it is likely to reach 60-65 million metric tons by 2030. Ceteris paribus. If anything else changes, we'll have to see. Our models account for climate change, but we anticipate that given the scenario, much from land increases, this is a very clear possibility. And we anticipate 25% of the production at any point in time going for distillation. Another thing I leave the audience with is, earlier we used to say that feed is the largest consumption basket of maize. So, if you look at ENA and distillation requirement, both of them at the moment, 2 million metric tons for ENA and about 13 to 15 million metric tons for distillation. The combined distillation demand in the country is likely to come closer, not exceed, but come closer sooner to the feed demand. So there is a change even in the composition of where it is being consumed. Deepak ji.
So do you think GMO a possibility with the type of demand which we are seeing and type of yield increase, or because relying too much on acreage, as you rightly mentioned about oilseed emission, the pulses self-sufficiency emissions, to ensure both grow parallelly? Do you think that the government could look at the possibility of looking at a GMO based, at least for our farmers to grow?
Deepak ji, I will answer it differently. I see very clearly that the need for yield augmentation is critical. It is something you cannot avoid at the moment because land is a cap. In which scenario yields have to augment. Now, yields will only go up just because we need a GMO and only then they will go up. It's something the scientists can say. We talk to ICAR very often. They say we have a high yielding variety seed. If adoption of that goes up, we can have marginal increases there also. But clearly the government also recognizes that land is limited. Yield is the only necessary way that the crops will augment. And why just maize? Deepak ji, you've been tracking sugarcane. Sugarcane yields are tapering. We see much of our crops yields are tapering. So science has lagged now, and the science and the R&D has to come up with at least a pipeline of some seeds coming in the future. Now, if it is GMO, we'll just have to wait and see. But there is HYB adoption that we anticipate will be more aggressive coming forward.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Shweta ji. It is always a pleasure to learn from you and always very insightful. Thanks a lot for joining this session.
You are kind. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we move to our next speaker, and we had a pretty interesting debate or discussion, I would say. I wouldn't say debate because we have not hardly debated. We are not TRP hunting a news channel. So next we are having in-house Mr. Kenneth Lim. Kenneth is a synergistic leader and networker serving as the program and partnership manager at the Global Center for Green Fuels in Singapore. We had a good discussion with Shweta ji on ethanol, and drawing on the experience of Kenneth, we would try to take it further. So drawing on his extensive background in agriculture, commodities and biofuel production, he specializes in managing cross-sector programs that link global feedstock trade flows with industrial energy development. His unique expertise allows him to cultivate high-impact alliances between governments and private enterprises to accelerate the regional transition towards low-carbon and sustainable alternative fuel. Thanks a lot, Kenneth, for joining us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Deepak. Thank you for the team for the invitation today. My pleasure. I think that was a really great, I wouldn't say debate, but I think a really good insight on corn usage, at least from the agricultural point of view, which is more, let's say, more upstream. I hope to share a bit more on, let's say, maybe more downstream in terms of its applications today, in terms of biofuels. And yeah, so happy to answer the questions as they come. Thank you.
Sure. So first question, how is the accelerating transition towards low carbon biofuels in Asia? You heard Sweta, like, the demand for biofuel is going to increase. It's not going anywhere. And India is a giant, right? When it comes to the
Sure.
type of population we are having, 1.4 billion people. It's a big number. So we are actively redrawing the traditional feedstock and maize trade flows. How do you see it going forward if the things accelerate in biofuels?
Sure. Maybe I can answer this in two ways, meaning one in terms of India and then one in terms of more of the regional developments. I think maybe for India, I think like what was discussed previously in the previous the previous panel session was that India has already reached E20, and of course they are going forward to, let's say, E22, 25, 27, and 30, because I think 2 weeks ago the BIS, the standards board, has already published the national specifications, right, for ethanol. I think on that note, I think I have an interesting stat here that I would like to share with everyone, is that using maize as compared to all the other so-called traditional feedstocks out there, I think India predominantly, in the history, was actually using more of the sugarcane-based feedstocks such as molasses in its ethanol production. But I think we can see in this marketing year for 2025, 2026, the OMC, the Indian OMCs, I think we can see that right now corn, so-called maize, ethanol base, is actually made up of 46% of the entire supply mix, and then followed by rice, which is at about 22%. So I think you can see that now, more than half, which is actually close to 60% of India's ethanol, is actually now more on so-called starch-based kind of feedstocks, as compared to traditionally, more sugarcane-based, where I think for this marketing year, the OMC's so-called the purchase of the ethanol supply mix, I think B molasses is now about 11%, and C molasses, I think you're only using 1% now in India. So I think that's a very interesting stat and development in India. So I think we definitely will see more maize so-called demand and requirements in this particular sector. So that's my take on India per se. But I think maybe I can share with the audience here what is happening in the region very quickly. So besides India, the other major producing countries for ethanol that uses maize are actually China. They uses both maize and cassava. And we also have Thailand. Thailand only uses cassava for now. And of course, Vietnam. Vietnam uses both cassava and maize. So the story right here is that if you look at all these countries, of course, besides China, which has stagnated a bit in terms of their biofuel and ethanol blending policy programs. But if you look at Thailand and Vietnam, so Vietnam has actually moved into E10. They were supposed to start actually today, the 1st of June, but due to the oil crisis, the government actually brought it forward by the end of April. So we have already started to see their national oil companies started to issue ethanol tender procurements. And we also start to see that they actually require more imports of feedstock to make ethanol, because they only have about 4 plants running right now, and it's definitely not enough. So, but Vietnam is that the beauty of Vietnam is that they can switch using cassava and corn depending on the season, depending on market dynamics and stuff like that. So we see that more trade flows should be going to Vietnam as well in terms of maize imports. However, if I turn my attention to Thailand, where I am right now, Thailand has been one of the so-called I would say success stories in Asia for ethanol, but I think India has now overtaken Thailand since last year. Thailand's case is a bit unique in the sense that they predominantly use cassava, but they need to actually adopt a so-called flexibility and multi-feedstock strategy. So that's why in their trade negotiation deals with the US right now, Thailand is trying to allow maybe up to 1 million metric tons of imports of US corn per year. So we are starting to see that perhaps more more maize imports will actually come into the region, especially for regions that have this kind of biofuel policy kind of blends in place. Yeah, so I think that is how I would say in terms of both India and also the regional developments. I would say maize requirement will be increased, and most of it will be actually covered by imports. Thank you.
Perfect. No, I totally agree with you. But Kenneth, actually, we talked about different feedstocks in different countries, and now the current crisis in Hormuz or West Asia has told us one thing, that actually, biofuels are gonna be there, right? We'll see mandates getting accelerated across the region. We are seeing that happening in Thailand, we are seeing that happening in Indonesia, Malaysia,
Yes.
which generally used to be a little bit slow. They have also become aggressive. And the price rise of fuel in Vietnam will definitely make Vietnam also become more aggressive. Now, do you think how these countries in the region, including India and East Asia, can
Sure.
collaborate to ensure that we don't get into bottlenecks? And in case there are bottlenecks, what could be those bottlenecks according to you?
Sure. When you mention bottlenecks, I believe it's more on, let's say, scaling them, right? In terms of, let's say,
Exactly.
production, in
Exactly.
terms of supply, things like that. I think maybe in terms of when you mention how can all these so-called countries, and different cross sectors actually can partner up together to to effectively resolve all these kind of bottlenecks. I think ultimately we need to understand and come back to the first picture is that biofuels policy. Ultimately, when we say policy, it means it's related to governments, related to administrations, right? So I think India has done a very, very good job in that. And actually, a lot of these countries in the Southeast Asia region are actually trying to follow suit. Like I said earlier on, Thailand used to be the leader, but now it has already been overtaken by India. So I think number one, what is the how can this kind of partnerships? What should happen actually? I think number one is more of case studies, successful case studies in terms of good policy planning by governments and also support. Meaning, if we look at the case of India, right, ultimately the EBP, the ethanol blending program, is ultimately to benefit farmers and also to create cross-sectoral so-called jobs and all that, right? So I think this can be a successful case study that can be applied in upcoming countries such as Indonesia, where Indonesia has already announced a target for E5 blending program next month in July. But how are they going to go about doing this? So I think perhaps in terms of case studies for policy planning and support needs to be understood. For example, subsidies, I think things like that. It applies, of course, differently to different countries, but ultimately we see that biofuel still requires this form of incentives. So I think different countries can so-called study all the different so-called incentives in place, and they can actually try to tailor-make and customize to their own market situation. I think second point, of course, political will, right? Political will in terms of, let's say, India and in terms of Vietnam, because like you see, Vietnam was supposed to start today, but because of the oil crisis, the government say, hey, no, we got to bring it forward, for the sake of our people, for the consumers at the, we don't want them to suffer at the pump price, and we make sure there's no shortage. So, things like that, how governments enforce certain actions, I think, different countries can also take into play. And I would say lastly, it's, I would say not in terms of what can be followed, I think what can be improved on in terms of studying the struggles of different feedstock constraints in different markets, because it's not always a success story out there, right? Certain countries try to implement biofuel policies, they fail. Why? And a lot of the times it's actually in terms of feedstock constraints. Actually, in fact, like what Mr. Deepak here mentioned about Indonesia, Indonesia tried, I think 10 years ago for ethanol blending, but they failed, right? Because there was simply not enough in terms of feedstocks, and in terms of the macroeconomics kind of thing. So I think all these, if you put into place, I think, countries can actually be able to learn better in terms of all these kind of case studies. And I think last point is that, we mentioned all these cross-sectorial, cross-ministerial overlappingness, right? So I think all this has to be an alignment. So alignment in between, the agricultural sector, the energy sector, the transport sector, and also in terms of commerce and finance, in terms of incentive support. Yeah. So thank you.
One more thing, actually, I think I found it very challenging to get Americans and Chinese both on an Indian program, right?
That's true.
So I struggle both with Chinese and Americans to get on board and to talk. They were not very keen, being like, this being an Indian platform. So those challenges also, I think we need to take it aside and see to it that actually there is more interaction between the stakeholders. Coming to you with the last question.
Sure.
We talk about biofuels, but at the same time, Asia also is the biggest consumer of food, right, when we come to the region. how do you see, like, we have limited amount of land and yields are not increasing to the level where suddenly, like, we can put 30% of our additional land to biofuels and still we'll be happy and we won't have challenge with the food. How do we balance that as a problem?
Sure. I think, this so-called food versus fuel debate has been around for like maybe decades, right? Ever since the so-called biofuels industry has taken off, right? I think both in terms of ethanol and in terms of even biodiesel even, right? So I think we need to just first and foremost understand about this is that each country and market varies, very, very differently in terms of the biofuel feedstocks that they use, right? Whether is it crop-based, whether is it not crop-based, first G, second G, that kind of things. And why I say so, because in some countries, some certain food crops or feedstocks are more abundant than the others, right? I mean, I think India is very lucky because you have a lot of maize, you have a lot of sugar. So I think India is in a good position in that sense, right? But I think, coming back to this point in terms of food versus fuel, I don't think we should think of it in this way. Why I say like this, I'll give you a few examples, right? So, if we look at Southeast Asia, right, in terms of, let's say, maize production and all that, it's Southeast Asia actually doesn't produce as much maize, we actually import a lot from India and a lot of countries as well, like the US. So if you look at our region, the region actually produces more food crops in terms of sugar and in terms of rice, right? Which is kind of similar to India in a sense. But if you analyze a little bit deeper into the applications of such crops and feedstocks, right, in terms of sugar and rice, there is usually a surplus, right? And hence, this region in terms of, like, let's say Thailand, even India as well, is usually a net exporter of such kind of crops, like, sugar and also rice, right? So, and if you look at this kind of food applications for this kind of products, right, they're already a staple diet in most of the people in Southeast Asia, in South Asia. Am I correct? And actually, if you think about it, the main energy needs from so-called this kind of starch and sugars, we are already pretty much fulfilled here in this region, right? So the balance here should actually be more requirement for protein, right? We need actually more protein content and consumption in our own diets in this part of the world. So that's why I feel like, in terms of talking about food diets per se, using all these kind of food crops into biofuel production will not necessarily actually impact, in terms of our, our diets and our staple and all that, right? And actually, if you think about it, in terms of the biofuel production, what is the byproduct of all this biofuel production? In fact, I can name a few, right? A lot of it, let's say example, use maize. There's the maize DDGS. What is the DDGS used for? It's for animal feed, right? And the animal feed, what does it go to? It goes to the poultry, the chickens and all that. And what do we gain out of it? It's, of course, more protein for the, for us to eat, right? And if you think about it, if you use maize, you get some corn oil out of it as well from the ethanol production process. So corn oil can be used for cooking oil, right? For vegetable oils, or you can even use it for, let's say, the biofuel blending program for your biodiesel or renewable diesel, right? And if you use other kind of feedstocks, right? For example, cassava, you get cassava pulps, you get, the bagasse and all that. All these are actually fertilizer inputs, which can be used to, grow actually more crops, right? And actually, even if you don't use that, you can even use it as a biomass feedstock to burn it for, biogas, right? So in fact, I think, people should not think of it as a competition between fuel and food, but actually, if you look at it, it's a biocircular kind of economy and industry that we should understand it, as a whole, instead of thinking we are competing with one another. Yeah, that's my take on it.
Perfect. Very well articulated, Kenneth. Loved it. In fact, I still believe I would love my pad thai, cow soy, right?
Exactly.
Highly protein rich, and I don't mind actually, like, the chicken having DDGS or soya meal. For me, it
Exactly.
is fine. Thanks a lot for your intervention. It was a pleasure having you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Right. So now we move to someone who has been done in the industry, talking about the advocacy on multiple aspects. So our next speaker is Mr. Rakesh Swami, and Mr. Swami is a veteran public policy advocate, strategist, serving as group president of corporate affairs at Godrej Industries Group. over a distinguished 25-year career spanning senior leadership roles at Honeywell, GE, and Reliance Industries, he has specialized in driving high-level government partnerships and regulatory advocacy. Armed with an agriculture background, he excels at aligning massive corporate agendas with national sustainable development goals and creating resilient public-private partnership. Welcome, Mr. Swami. Pleasure to have you, sir.
Thank you so much, Deepak ji, and thank you so much for having me here as a part of this very, very important initiative. And I'm very happy that we are talking about maize and we are talking about the various commodities that are so very important, not only for us and industry, but for our farmers. So I'm very glad to be part of this session and the conversation today. And you are, and what can be the better than talking to somebody who is not only just an industry veteran, farmer himself, and also expert in various areas. And I saw your bio profile saying Forbes featured you as a rainmaker. So I think we need a lot of rains this year where people are talking about El Nino and Super Nino and everything. But with the people like you and your positive vibes, I'm sure we'll have great, monsoons ahead and also the good positive impact on the overall industrial and also the agricultural ecosystem in the country.
Perfect, sir. Thanks a lot for such kind words. I'm just an humble student trying to learn from experts like you. So, sir, first question to you, being a senior policy professional, what is your take on current maize situation in India and how can we address this with desired policy framework by addressing demand-supply imbalances, sir?
Great. I think that's a very relevant question and being in the public policy advocacy space. So I strongly feel that this is one area wherein if we can focus with a lot of vigor and energy and coming together to analyze the sector. And, I was listening to the experts and esteemed panelists. So first of all, we have to look at the structural demand supply gap which we are facing in India. And the consumption of maize is growing faster than the production. So as of now, like this year will produce about 45 to 48 million metric ton of the maize, which is like our domestic production is growing about 2 to 3%, on a higher side. But whereas the demand is growing more than that, that's about 5 to 8% annually. So if this project and this forecast continues, then we will need 72 million metric ton of maize by 2030-31. So it means we'll have to be very, very cautious and sustain the growth. And because there are land constraints, there are climate risks, post-harvest losses, and sudden now the diversion of maize to ethanol is also impacting the industry. And this could be quite challenging. And the immediate and coordinated efforts by all players is the need of the hour. And to be very specific, what we proactive long-term policy framework we can acquire, I think first of all, India as a country, we need to develop a national maize demand supply forecasting mechanism. So we don't have any demand forecasting mechanism as of now today, but coming together with the government, industry, I think we need to develop this demand forecasting mechanism so that the appropriate measures can be taken. Also, on the second piece, I'll say that we need to ensure a staple, predictable trade policies like imports, and we'll have to be flexible because today the kind of flexibility which we are experiencing is not good enough. So need to be have flexible policies on the import side and allocation of alternate grains so that the industries, they can kind of take the sides of the either surplus or deficit, so accordingly we can mitigate those risks involved with our technical interventions and alignment of supply chain. So I would say that a balanced policy approach is very, very important for the adequate supply of maize for all consuming industries and maintaining the affordability and also having good farmer profitability as well at the same time frame.
Perfect, sir. Now,
Ji.
what are the fundamental elements of a resilient public-private partnership capable of withstanding severe supply chain and policy disruption, which we are seeing because of, as you rightly mentioned, that this whole talk about El Nino could lead to a challenge in productivity. We are also already seeing the crisis in West Asia impacting actually our prices for the farmers. How do you see we can I would say outmaneuver all these things by having a fundamental foundational elements of resilient public-private partnerships?
Very important question, Deepak ji. And I think the key for the solution or key or answer to solve this problem can be through public-private partnership. Alone, government or private sectors or the farmers can't solve for it. So maybe in my view, I'll give a couple of pointers which are very, very important for keeping this partnership in mind. First of all, we need to establish a real-time data sharing and, as I said earlier, a forecast mechanism for resilient partnerships, which require integrated digital platforms that can provide visibility on the crop acreages, production forecast, stock level, prices, and weather-related risk. Early warning system can help us and also help the government and industry proactively manage storage and inflation and supply disruptions. The second important area wherein we can work together is developing the adaptive government structure and fast decision-making mechanism. Because through public-private partnership, we have to move beyond rigid institutional structures. Joint coordination committee with equal participation from the government and industry, coupled with fast-track negotiation mechanism, is essential for responding quickly to market volatility and also changing the policy environment. So these are the two areas, maybe a couple of more areas, if I can think of from the policy standpoint, is diversifying the sourcing and strengthening the decentralized infrastructure. So in the current environment, when the nearly 60% of India's maize production is concentrated in the Kharif season, so a resilient supply chain mechanism and sourcing it from the multiple agroclimatic zones and cropping season is very, very important. Investments in the regional silos and dryers mechanism and also buffer storage system can reduce supply chain shocks and also seasonal price volatility for the industry as well as for the farmers. And fourth point, I would say that we have to create shared investment in the post-harvest and quality infrastructure. So a lot of time we will hear that the aflatoxin contaminations and poor storage are the challenges for us. And with PPP, government is trying to solve for it. But this sector needs prioritization. This needs the scientific drying system. We need testing laboratories, traceability mechanisms, and modern logistics infrastructure to improve the high quality assurance and reduce economic losses, which are across the value chain, which can impact the farmers and all other players. So I broadly feel that maybe if these four areas are addressed, hopefully with the with the policy interventions, we can have better resilience system and assured supply chain for the maize in our country.
So Rakesh, let me take a little bit of divergent step because I will indulge seeing the type of work Godrej is doing across the poultry value chain. You are into nutrients, you are into finished product, you are into processing. So you are actually from, I would say, the grassroots level to the plate which we have. So they are already seeing challenge of feed, right? The poultry industry has been talking about it, whether we are talking about the protein-based meals, whether we're talking about the urea. Are you seeing those challenges, and what could be the possible rectification for that when it comes from the government side, and what policy advocacy do you see needs to be done to ensure that, our poultry industry doesn't suffer?
Deepak ji, you raised a very, very important and burning, issue which all of us are grappling with. And I'm very proud to say that Godrej Agrovet is a complete integrated agriculture company across the value chain, whether maybe I'm just taking a little bit of diversion here, whether it is the largest oil palm producer or the largest cattle feed manufacturer. We manufacture poultry feed, aqua feed, and also frozen food, and also we manufacture the dairy products as well, and also on the crop care side. So I think all of us are facing severe challenges on the supply side, and three things are very critical, and I'll talk about two. So maize supply is very important, and assurance and the steady supply chain is important. Soybean is equally important crop, though we are not talking about it today. We'll talk on some other day. And the third factor, which is common between them, is urea. So not only that urea is needed for growing the maize and having a high productivity of maize at the farmer's field. At the same time, urea is needed by the cattle feed manufacturer. So my colleague was mentioning about the recent change in the BIS norms. So BIS gave a mandate that 1% of the technical grade urea can be used in the manufacturing of cattle feed. And that is super helpful because it's very easy, palatable source of protein, and it helps improving the milk production for the farmers and the dairy as a sector. But unfortunately, because of the recent West Asia crisis, the whole industry is grappling with this issue. So India, we need about 2.5 lakh metric ton of the urea per year. And one issue is that this whole of this urea is not subsidized, though it is being used by the farmers, dairy farmers. But to keep that aside, as of now, the urea, technical grade urea prices have gone up from 45 rupees per kg or 45,000 rupees per metric ton to the 95,000 rupees per metric ton in last 3 months alone. And not even at 95,000 rupees metric ton, the technical grade urea is not available. So I think the government need to reconsider the strategy, that look at the industry initiatives, look at how the whole supply chain ecosystem is working in the country, allocate some urea for the dairy farmers as well through these cattle feed manufacturers, so that the productivity should not come down. So otherwise what happens is you are trying to just mitigate one risk which is related to urea supply chain, and you are leading to another big issue, which is the income going down for the farmers and productivity of the milk going down for the farmers. So I think we need to have a very transparent, efficient policy ecosystem which can stabilize the prices and also improve the raw material availability, which is like maize we are talking. So the import export policy, the timely price control mechanism, and the commodities like urea, which is very important both for the farmers and for the industry, some bit of rationing, some bit of allocation, so that both the industries can survive and thrive with some optimum level of allocation. So maybe with this platform, I thought this is very important, not only to just talk about maize alone, but all the connected element as well, which are so very well and important for the overall upkeep and the betterment of the industry and industry ecosystem.
Perfect, Mr. Rakesh. Actually, I would just like to update. Just now, we have crossed 1,000 live viewers on different platforms. So this is a very well seen and noticed platform, and by the right sort of people. We are not TikTok video generators, right? It is very specific for policymakers and the agribusiness itself. Sir, coming to last question, see, one of the very important aspect of Godrej, and I had a lot of engagement interactions with Burgess on that, agri-tech, modernization of agriculture. Where do you see policy playing a role in ensuring that we invest more in modernization of agriculture, in R&D? You have been pioneers, but again, you need support, isn't it?
Absolutely, very well said that, Deepak ji, and Godrej is maybe always an early adopter of the technology. Not only adopter, we believe in, R&D. So we invest a lot of, impetus, energy into the R&D space. So even for cattle feed and all, that NG Card is our national level research institute in Maharashtra, focusing a lot on the developing the right feed for the animals. And also we have embryo transplant and many other poultry feed and the R&D facilities. But alone we can't do much. So we'll have to have hand holding. We need to have partnership with the government and larger institutions. State agriculture universities, I feel, are underutilized as of now. So I think some sort of partnership with state agriculture universities, their laboratories, CICR laboratories, and also the industrial laboratories with the companies like us. I think more communication, more coordination, and more knowledge leveling and sharing of the research for the larger good is very, very important. So there is no second thought about it, like developing the best practices, developing the new technology and sharing it for the larger good is the need of the hour. And I think that's how we will grow together. And that's how we will be, Viksit Bharat together, with sharing these practices and, replicating in the masses is so very important.
No, I totally agree with you, Rakeshji, and it's a pleasure to speak to you and understand from you the perspective of one of the most technology advanced company in India when it comes to agriculture. Thanks a lot for joining us and looking forward to have more engagement. And I totally take your points on more collaboration. And I believe we have to move beyond associations and we have to start working as a think tanks where actually we are able to draft right policies right from multiple perspectives rather than from angle, because when we talk about associations and councils, the challenge is that actually they see a perspective from maybe an agribusiness or typically a cooperative. We need a 360-degree assessment and come out with recommendation to the government. And I strongly believe that current government is smart enough to take right advocacy. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you, Deepak ji. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया and wish you the best for your ongoing dialogues. And I'm sure, Sarthi, something better and concrete will emerge up, which you can share with the government, and all of us will take it together for the betterment of overall industrial ecosystem in the country and continue to, do our best for the development of India and making India Viksit Bharat. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day ahead. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you. So now we go to our last speaker of the day. We are having in-house Major Rajiv Yadav, retired. He is a co-founder and designated partner at reshaped Agri LLP, a premier agriculture advisory and management consultancy company. He transitioned from a distinguished leadership background from his active service as a major in Indian Army. From there, he moved to business, where his expertise is in corporate agribusiness, notably specializing in end-to-end agri supply chain management, post-harvest infrastructure, and commodity trading risk. Renowned for his deep understanding of crop estimation, particularly across grains, oilseed, and maize, Major Yadav is prominent industry thought leader and market expert who has worked with all major MNCs like Cargill, COFCO, Olam, Heineken, Agrocop, etc. at all senior level. Thanks a lot, Major Raj, to join us.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, sir. You're audible.
Great.
So, sir,
Great.
I'll shoot the first question. How are supply chain networks being redesigned to remain high performing despite the extreme volatility of today's commodity environment?
Deepak bhai, I'm sure you are very straight to the point, but I just wanted to take a couple of minutes. Thank you for having me on your show, giving me an opportunity, and also announcing about my new venture. I really appreciate that. Having said so, I joined the meeting right on the time, and I've been hearing to all the speakers all this while. Couple of takers, I'll straight away come to your point for sure. But in the meantime, Aramal covered the international S&D very well. My only addition to that would be that, while China is heading to a big crop, but I am of the opinion that their stocks are still declining at a very high level, and they might come back as a big game changer in the global S&D. Coming on to Ricky Thapar Saab's comment, I was of the opinion that, he was of the opinion that import should be allowed forever. I am not very much, because if we have to become Atmanirbhar, if we have to support our own farmers, I would prefer we give the first importance to our farmers. You yourself were sounding very reluctant in terms of allowing the GMO or the government not taking initiative. I have always been talking about GMO is the necessity of the time. That's something which I have always been talking about. US ambassador yesterday or day before yesterday tweeted that India and US are very close to signing the trade agreement or the trade treaty or whatever. But what is the amount of DDGS what they are talking about is something what we need to read between the lines. So that's on the initial side. Rakesh Swami had great points in terms of public-private participation. But my question remains: who is spending on the R&D? Today, the R&D spend, I don't see anybody investing neither on the private side nor on the government side. These were the couple of takes of mine from the previous speakers. Coming back to your point, the scenario, if you look at the cattle feed side, if you look at the poultry feed side, the scenario has completely changed in the last couple of years. Earlier, the process was very simple. There used to be farmers, then they will go to the mandis, there'll be aggregators, and finally the product will go to the feed miller or to the exporter. India used to have an export surplus anywhere between 3 to 4 million tons. From there, now India is staring at a necessity of, getting converted into a net importer for that matter. And obviously, a lot of speakers have already spoken about there's a huge competition between poultry and cattle feed, starch and food processing, and then the new entrant obviously in the game is the ethanol. which we are all talking about. So how do the poultry and the cattle feed manufacturers kind of diversify or get better into their procurement strategies? Obviously, they are supposed to move more closer to the origins. If you look at all the grain-based distilleries, most of the grain-based distilleries are coming in at the origin, which is wherein the maize is being produced, whether it is Bihar, Karnataka, MP, Telangana, or most of these states which are the major producers. Also, there's a lot of compulsion on the cattle feeds and the poultry feeds, so go more closer to the origins, and also go to the village levels, tie up with the FPOs to get more deep access into the public. I mean, they get a quality as well as quantity side of it. Earlier, the companies were able to survive with procurement within 1 or 2 states, but now, since the size and the stature of the companies like Cargill Animal Nutrition, Godrej, Paras, Tivana, all these guys growing, in the cattle feed side, and similarly on Shanti's, Suguna's, Venki's, they have to go multi-state level. There's not much of the choice left for them to be specific to. And also, I mean, my raised in the alarm is that obviously we face heavy challenges in terms of aflatoxins. A lot of earlier speakers have already spoken about it. That continues to remain a challenge for us. So we really need to kind of look at the ways of developing the infrastructure around drying the corn at the right time and reducing that high moisture to low moisture so that the aflatoxin remains controlled. So that's my first answer, Deepak Bhai.
As usual, very well articulated. I'll just add one small point because, you talked about R&D investment. In fact, I can vouch for Godrej, and I've been engaging with the leadership, right? And the type of work they have done in R&D is fabulous. More can be done by other industry players for sure. And there are some players, I don't want to mention all of them, but I believe some of the private sector players, they're definitely good work. But yes, we need to augment that with more investment by the government, right, in R&D, and also in spending the R&D amount in a right manner, right? Releasing 300 varieties actually, in a single year doesn't help. I would just need 4 or 5 varieties, which actually a farmer is sure that actually it works. So that is more important. And I was not reluctant about GMO. I think I've been the most vocal voice when it comes to GMO, right? Talking it from ICRs to the private sector conferences. Sometimes also getting brickbat from a lot of industry association of being so vocal about GMO. I was just trying to play my role as a moderator, Rajiv Bhai, so someday when actually Mrityunjay or Manisha, when she or he grills me, I would be more vocal about it. Today I'm limiting myself in the role I'm having. Now that brings me to the second very important. Yeah, please.
Before you move to the second question, I mean, Shweta also commented about it, and I remember I have always been pointing about it that if you go back to our ex-PM, he was always of the opinion that Indian farmer is the wisest economist in the world, rather. If he's capable of taking the crop from 28 million tons to 47, and if he doesn't get paid, I don't see him getting it back from 47 to 28 sometime soon. So at the end of the day, it is a farmer's realization what matters. He's the best judge in himself in terms of deciding which crop to be sown and which gets him a better. So that's all I just wanted to add.
Perfect. So the next question would be, what end-to-end operational execution strategies are critical for maintaining strict quality assurance while sourcing raw material at scale? I'm talking about focused on DDGS. We are seeing the challenges of aflatoxin and all that. Mr. Swami also touched upon that. How do you see that actually we are able to solve these problems? Otherwise, the confidence of a poultry farmer or aqua farmer would not be there, specifically in aqua farmer. They're very sensitive, farmers of such adulterants, or I would say that toxins. Your views on that, how we can solve such problems?
Sure. So as I said, I've already covered that part in the sense we need to have better drying facilities across mandis, across the producing areas. That's the first step which we look at. Then probably even for these companies, they will have to go closer to the origin and also develop the ability to do the scientific quality control checks at the origin itself, rather than getting the cargo all the way to the factory and then reject the same, because that is a problem to the seller as well as a buyer. So, so somewhere these guys, and there's a lot of improvement which has definitely happened over a period of time. There are a lot of on-ground testing mechanisms wherein you can go and check the aflatoxin levels of the DDGS right at the production center, and then take it, once if it is well within. I can give you an example of one of the traders, he's based at one of the DDGS plants, and, he places 4 vehicles at the same time. So 20 ppb goes to vehicle number 1, 30 to 50 ppb goes to vehicle number 2, 50 to 100 goes into something, third vehicle. And that's the kind of smartness what we need to go against. But yes, the problem lies and if you have an end consumer like Nestle and all these people, where they are very, very particular about aflatoxin levels, because the cattle feed is going to consume, if it consumes the cattle feed of higher aflatoxin, that will lead to M1, M2 toxin, which gets highly rejected by all these MNCs for sure, whether it is any of the best companies, Mother Dairy or Amul or Nestle, or for that matter, So we have to go closer to the origin. There's a lot of scientific development which has happened in terms of the equipments which are already in place. And I have myself been, work for the cattle feed industry, and I've seen that, yes, we have been able to manage or tackle this aflatoxin problem to a quite a large extent. That's somewhere down the line. Also, my additional recommendation on this point would be that, we need to really start focusing on traceability. Today, when we are also talking about having an EU deal with India, trade deal, EU is very specific about whether whatever product, gets out of any of our factories, it has to be traceable, which farm, which farmer, which origin, which state. So that traceability factor, as of now, the industry is not focusing much, especially on the maize and the DDGS side. That's something which we need to look at. Over to you, Deepak Pareek.
Thanks a lot. I think this was a burning problem, which I think it needed some solution. So now coming to the last question, because based on your extensive experience, how is the optimization of raw material procurement evolving to meet the rapidly scaling and shifting demands of animal nutrition sector? Because that, we are seeing so many of now inputs available, so much of noise being created, DDGS, soya meal, urea, challenges all across, right? GMO, non-GMO. So with all this noise, how we can ensure that, we can optimize and make the procurement economic enough so that actually the end consumer, which is the farmer who uses the animal feed, is taken care of in a very economic manner.
Very apt question, Deepak Bhai. You have grilled all the speakers with the best of the possible questions around, for sure. Compliments to you. Having said so, when I look at the animal nutrition, whether it is cattle feed or poultry feed, or even for that matter, aqua feed, the time has come when they start working on various scenarios, and those scenarios would have to be based on year premises. So for example, the scenario A could be that this year would be a normal crop plus a stable ethanol demand. So that could be a scenario 1. Scenario 2 could be a weak kharif crop, which obviously we are looking at this year. I don't want to raise too much alarms as of now. And then if there is an additional elevated ethanol offtake, from the government policy side, so that's another scenario. The third thing is what kind of a policy interventions are there from the government side, whether government relaxes some kind of import norms, whether it allows non-GMO from LDC countries, or whether it also goes to the extent of allowing some GMO end products coming into India, like what we heard from one of the previous speakers in the past, that we have seen those years when soybean prices touched about 1 lakh rupees, and then finally we were left with no choice other than to import even the GMO meal. So for me, the animal nutrition companies have to work on various scenarios. They have to be very watchful of the government policies, and I would also put it this way, that in a year like this, forward coverage becomes more of a necessity rather than a choice. I know people would say that a lot of people who have lost money last 2 to 3 years in storing the maize, and it has not been very productive. But as I just said, the decision has to be very specific year on year. The scenarios developing around, scenarios going around in Gulf. Somebody spoke about the technical grade urea. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, today the technical grade urea, the prices have gone off the roof, and they're finding it very difficult. But it is an essential item, so for most of these industries, because that's the only source of ammonia for the cattle feed, and that is a necessity, especially in the cattle feed side of it. So the companies have to work on various this thing. Third is, obviously, I have always been recommending on various platforms as something which we need to really work on is the logistics part of it. I mean, somebody might not like my comment, but I'm not against the jute industry, but we really need to move away from this. We have to move to the bulk packing, wherein I can transport, do the logistics, whether in rakes or in trucks, in bulk, rather than first doing that effort of putting it in jute bags, then taking it to the plant, then repacking it, then consuming it for the production and all this. That is only an addition. If you look at most of the developed nations, the logistics side of it has already moved into a bulk movement. That's what is my strong recommendation, because that will reduce our spillages, losses, post-harvest losses, and all that stuff. So that's all I had to say, Deepak Bhai.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Rajiv. It is a pleasure to have you. Always very eloquent, and wishing you all the best for your new venture. I
Thank you,
hope
sir.
it scale bigger than the companies you have worked in past. Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. This was my pleasure, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we had a very interesting discussions of late, for past nearly 2 hours, and we are gonna be touching 2 hours soon, and the time flies. So I would first of all again thank all my speakers. They have been, I would say, strength for us to get into something which is so exciting, talking about very important commodity today, maize, and specifically a very complex region, that is Asia and Pacific, because it has 2 of the largest consumers, which includes China and India, as well as we are seeing demand changes happening all across ASEAN or Southeast Asia. So thanks a lot, all of you. The final takeaway for me would be that maize is still a very important crop, because as we have said that it touches food, feed, and fuel. Balance need to be created. Government needs to be more proactive. And for a country like India, where if you want to increase the production of maize, you cannot just rely on acreage, because it will eat away into some food which is critical for India's nutrition, whether it is pulses or whether it is oilseed. At the same time, we have also had some discussion about China, where China has been continuously increasing their production, and they're relying more on yields rather than acreage. But at the same time, China's appetite for consuming maize is always increasing. And we will see going forward also keep on increasing. And as Mr. Rajiv rightly mentioned, China can be, I would say, a Trump in the Trump's plan, where he wants to send more maize to Asia. With that, I would thank all my audience. And as I said, we touched across multiple platforms, close to 1,000 viewers. Just to remind you, we are on X, we are on Facebook, we are on LinkedIn, and we are on our own site, which is commodity-week.com. With that, I would also like an opportunity to thank all our partners, HnyB, KYC, World Cooperation Economic Forum, OATA Myanmar, Bajrang International Group Dubai, Bingani Group, Agri Guru, Ukraine Pulses and Soybean Association, GOPKI Indonesia, Solidaridad, Kripco Agri, and our media partner, AgTrade. Thank you. Signing off. Looking forward to see you again at 2:30 p.m. India time or 9 a.m. GMT, where we will be discussing about Europe, Middle East, and Africa with lens of maize again. We also have an upcoming session today, which starts at 9 a.m. New York time, which would cover multiple aspects of maize and maize ecosystem in America, that is North America and South America. With that, signing off. Looking forward to see you soon in few hours. Thank